Hello everyone, this is Building Docs Like Code, Continuous Integration for Documentation. My name is Mason Egger and I serve the developer community at DigitalOcean. I am also a volunteer educator for the Microsoft Philanthropy program called TEALS, which pairs industry professionals with teachers across the nation to help get computer science into schools. I am also a documentation fanatic. So, who is this talk for? This talk is for basically anybody, whether you're an open source maintainer or you're a junior or senior developer, you manage either a program or a community, you're a DevOps engineer, really and truly the list just goes on and on and on. In reality, this talk is for anyone who writes, maintains, or manages a product that they intend to share with someone else. So, first part of this talk, let's talk about how we manage documentation. So, this is a common approach to documentation, and it's the tale as old as time. Developer writes code, developer commits their code, the code goes through reviews and tests to make sure that it is quality code. Is it ready for release? Did the code pass the tests? Is it time for us to move forward? If the answer is no, the developer goes back and is happy and writes more code. If the answer is yes, on the other hand, well, someone now needs to write the docs because now the customers are, expecting to have docs with their code. So now this other person could be a developer, it could be a technical writer, it could be a different developer who wasn't even on the project, it could be a new hire, it could be an intern. That would lead to some really interesting docs to have your intern write your documentation, but it does happen. So, issues with this current approach, with this current model. Documentation is almost an afterthought in this. Long release cycles can also lead to things being forgotten. I know a lot of us want to do agile development and we think of iterative releases and 2-week cycles and stuff, but my first job actually was building a physical appliance and an operating system that went onto a physical appliance that we shipped out the door that went to a lot of locations that didn't have internet access. So our release cycle was 8 months. And if you asked me at the end of that 8 months what I had worked on at the beginning and needed to document it, it was going to probably be really difficult for me to remember what on earth I had done. Also, the more layers of separation between the implementer and the author, the more probability is, the more likely the docs will become inaccurate. So some companies do have technical writers that work really closely with the engineers to work with their docs, and that's great. But having a different engineer write them, or having the intern who doesn't understand the project write the docs, introduces this layer of separation, and it's going to likely lead to inaccurate documentation. And the biggest issue with it is that the developer dislikes documenting. And that's actually the part that I want to focus on, is the developer dislikes documenting. Why do developers dislike documenting their code? Because, I've been to PyCon before, as have some of you who have viewing this video, and maybe some of you who have maybe been to other conferences or been around your coworkers or in your classrooms or something. And developers enjoy writing code. I would beg to say that it's probably a likely scenario that all of us here enjoy writing code, and we enjoy talking about our code. The hallway track at PyCon is full of people just catching up and talking about their projects and doing all of that. So developers enjoy telling people what they've done. So why do developers hate writing about their code? It literally is just a way of talking about your code, except instead of it coming out of your mouth, it goes onto a piece of paper. And this helps us to realize the real issue. And that is, most developers don't dislike writing documentation. What they really dislike is the workflow that they are forced into to write this documentation. A developer has to switch tools when they want to document something. I have to leave my code editor. I have to leave my terminal. I have to go to this, who knows what it is, maybe this Microsoft Word, maybe it's some sort of wiki that lives in my system. I have to leave what I'm doing and go somewhere else to use somebody's barely working, what you see is what you get editor to create this code. To create these docs. So this context switch makes them reluctant to write docs, so the task gets pushed off to the very end. I don't want to leave my text editor. I'm in the middle of working on my code. Why are you making me leave this workflow that I'm comfortable with? I'll just do it later. That happens all the time. So how can we integrate the documentation process into a workflow to make it more enjoyable for developers? So let's think about it a different way. Instead of treating the docs like docs, what if we treat our docs like code? What if instead of having our docs external to the code, they live right next to it inside of our repository? What if we use languages like markup or restructured text or something like that, that developers already know, instead of, again, a busted WYSIWYG editor that doesn't let you create links or something. So what do I mean by treating the docs like code, though? People will say, well, Mason, these are docs. They don't execute. How can they be code? Well, they're not really code, but we can treat them like code. So this means that our doc files are stored in a version control system, just like our code. They could be stored right alongside of it. Our docs could be in the same directory as our source code. The docs are built automatically. The artifacts are built automatically with every commit, with every pull request. This means we can build the docs automatically every time we push them or commit them. So just how we normally would run unit tests and we would get an artifact from those, maybe like a test report, we can also build our docs and we can view the docs with every change. This ensure a trusted set of reviewers to make sure that the docs are meticulously reviewed. We do code reviews on our code all the time. Why don't we do the same level of meticulousness across our docs? We can check to see if the docs are tested both for accuracy and functionality. And yes, you can test docs. Sphinx allows you to do things like testing to make sure that hyperlinks actually go where you say they go, and if code snippets actually work and produce the outputs that you say they do. So we can totally test docs. And this also allows us to publish the artifacts without human intervention. So, what do we gain from this if we treat our docs like code? This promotes collaboration. That just how GitHub helps us promote collaboration with our source code, it helps us promote collaboration with our documentation. Somebody can do a pull who can see that the docs are mistaken or broken. Maybe somebody from another team, somebody from support, maybe it's an open source project, and someone in the community who's maybe doing something like Hacktoberfest can view these docs, change them, and do a pull request back up, and they will help collaborate and help build your docs and make them better. It allows us to track documentation mistakes as bugs. One of my favorite things that I heard a long time ago when I first started was that the OpenBSD community, which is a BSD-based operating system, one of the last living Unix remnants, treats bugs in their documentation as nothing less than a critical bug. Because the docs are important, people will be using them, and you have to treat them as such. Mistakes in documentation should be treated as bugs, and they should be treated as relatively high bugs, because otherwise people will use your product wrong, and then they will, complain about it on Twitter, which is what most people do. This allowed you to include the docs in the code review. A lot of times, if you write new code, you have to have a unit test, or your team lead won't accept that code review. They won't even start reviewing it until you have unit tests. All we need to do is we can expand that to now say that we include a docs update, or at least an explanation of why the docs don't need to be updated if you are doing this. And more often than not, if you're adding code, the docs probably need to be updated. You're probably fixing a bug, you're adding a new feature, you're making something maybe a little bit more performance enhanced. That may not require a little bit, but it's likely that if you're making a change, you need to update the docs. It allows us to make beautiful and uniform docs. We can create a process that creates the same looking docs across the company, across the project, and they all come out looking great. It allows us to leverage developer tools and workflows. We've been using things like Agile and like GitOps and things. We've been using all of these developer tools and workflows for so long that we're used to them, and they've helped us become more efficient in our coding world. We will be able to leverage these workflows and tools like Git to version our docs, version docs, to gain all of this stuff from it. It also empowers developers to document. Developers actually enjoy documenting this way. When you've added it as part of the docs into the code review where it's required, it eventually just becomes second nature, and developers are constantly updating the docs. And I actually have a case study to prove this. Actually, I have two case studies to prove this. A new team at HomeAway, Verbo, which is where I used to be a site reliability engineer at before I joined DigitalOcean, was building a new product, new GitHub organization, new team members, everything. I was going to be on this team. And the first repository added into that GitHub organization was the documentation repository. This was really interesting because it allowed us, before we even started building the product, all of our architectural discussions, all of the decisions we were making, all of the should we use this tool or that tool was documented, and then just get pushed at the end of the day as Markdown, and then it would automatically update the site that has our docs. Everybody could easily follow along and see what we were doing every day, and it was really amazing. The docs were the most up-to-date and well-maintained in the entire org, in the entire department. Everybody always knew what we were working on. We never had to have like, hey, what's going on meetings with our director and stuff. They were some of the best docs that there were. And then I actually have a new case study for those of you who have seen this talk before. And I'm not going to read all of this, but right before I left Verbo, I had joined a new team, and this new team was in charge of a large API that had decent documentation, but not the greatest. I introduced this workflow, this documentation as code workflow, and I've gotten this huge wall of text from my friend. And some of this, the major highlights, one of my ex-coworkers actually, from this, says that the docs, this has completely transformed the team. They have improved their docs. We're now at 29 separate sections in the internal docs and 111 sections in internal. This includes runbooks. This includes architectural decisions on why we chose to do this. This includes outages. All of the team's postmortems are put in these docs, so you can go and read the entire incident from start to finish, and you can see all of them chronologically as what incidents have come up. They've all been really good. It's also allowed for team onboarding to go down to a matter of days. When I was onboarding onto this team, it took 2 months of like meetings and like whiteboarding and, oh, we forgot you needed access to this Git repository and all of that. All of that is now documented now, and they can actually onboard a team member in just a few days. So I'm not going to read the rest of this, but if you're interested, I would definitely read this. This kind of proves the point that like if you have good docs and you make developers want to write them, they will, and it will transform your org. So how does this change the workflow that we were talking about earlier? The developer writes code, but now they also write the docs at the same time. The developer commits this code and the docs because they're either in the same repository or maybe they're in a separate repository for a more, mainstream docs one. But you commit both of them at the same time. They go through the reviews, they go through the testing. Is it time to release? No. The developer goes back and writes code and docs. If we say yes, we simply push a button because the docs have been a part of this process the whole time. And now the artifact of the build, any other code artifacts, and the docs are pushed, and the developer can go right back into writing code with no interruption for having to pause and let's do a docs sprint. I've actually heard of those before. And if you're doing a docs sprint, I would highly recommend you look at this workflow. I feel like you'll get a lot more iterative cycles out of this workflow than if you're using a docs sprint. So, what is the tooling and what is some CI/CD stuff for documentation? So, just a quick definition, because computer science and software engineering are filled with acronyms that nobody ever takes the time to explain, so I'm going to explain them. Continuous integration means that code is continuously tested, integrated with other code changes, and then they are merged in. Continuous deployment means the code is continuously deployed out to either a testing or production server with each patch to the entire code base. These definitions come directly out of the Docs-like code book from Ann Gentle. So, what does this mean for docs? Well, for docs, CI/CD means building a full artifact of the docs with every single patch. So every time I do a patch version, I get a new version of the docs. In reality, the version of your docs should line up perfectly with the version of your code. You are continuously testing the content with each patch. I can do doc test stuff and test the code and make sure that it works. I can make sure that all my links work. I'm actually testing these docs. The new sections are either hand tested by QA or by myself to make sure that what I wrote in there is actually true. They are publishing automatically with every release, and we have versioning of the docs. Version docs are literally like, the best thing ever if you've never had them. I don't know, you're like, I don't know which version of the API is this. Is it this version? Is it this version? Oh no, look, the docs were included in the release. Now I can know exactly what they meant when they said this for this version, and it's helpful. So, there are different types of documentation and different types that you will encounter. There's what we call long-form documentation, which are user guides, getting started, FAQs, etc. So these are actually docs that could possibly live in a separate repository from your code. Ours did at Verbo. And these are, just the whole welcome to this API, this is how you use it kind of thing. If you're not using a code-generated style API like Swagger. And then there's also functional documentation like RESTful APIs, SDKs, man pages and stuff. These are actually more likely to be inside of the repository of the source code, and they're probably going to be using some sort of auto-generated tool to help generate a lot of the content in them instead of doing a lot of the manual writing, which you would kind of see in long-form documentation. So, documentation tools that we have static site generators, MkDocs, Hugo. There's so many. I actually saw a friend of mine post a tweet about it on Twitter the other day and asking, which static site generator do you use? And everybody was commenting, and so many people have just written their own. There's literally probably like more static site generators than there are developers in the world. Good for long form documentation, FAQs, runbooks. This was the kind of thing that my buddy Jared in the previous slide had used, was a static site generator to generate all of this code. So that way it was easily searchable, uniform, but still felt like writing code when you were writing it. Source code based documentation generators, documentation that lives inside of the code. PyDoc is one of them, Sphinx, JavaDoc, and then some even generate clients for testing like Swagger, which will generate API testing clients and such. And then there's system documentation generators. I put this one in here because it makes me giggle every time I think about it. It's called ronn. It's a markdown based man page generator, and as an SRE, I love man pages, but it makes me laugh because the format for man pages is ROFF, ROFF, and they made the tool ronn because it's the opposite of ROFF, and I giggle every time I think about it, so now you get to hear about it too. So, documentation tools. However, though, I once heard this great quote from Drew Levine, who is a core documentation maintainer of the FreeBSD project, and at her talk at Texas Linux Festival about Sphinx. And essentially it was, the more powerful your documentation tool is, the more complex it is to use. WYSIWYG editors like Microsoft Word, relatively easy to use, but not that much power in them. Tools like LaTeX and then like Sphinx, if you look at the curve on Sphinx, it actually goes backwards. They're really powerful tools and you can do almost anything with them. And so just know that like the farther down this rabbit hole you go, the more complex the tooling will get. So, documentation tools, MkDocs. We're going to talk about two documentation tools that I like using, one for static sites, one for code generation, and then go from there. So MkDocs, or MkDocs, I actually don't know how they prefer it to be said, is a markdown-based documentation, YAML-based config file tool. It is honestly, in my opinion, the easiest static site tool I've ever seen. There's a YAML file and there's a directory where all your stuff goes. Organize it accordingly. It works amazingly well. The time to hello world on this tool is about 30 seconds. It is super easy to get it up and running. It is easy to configure. There are many extensions and themes supported. I personally use the MkDocs material theme. I feel like it just gives it a really nice flow, and it has an amazing search functionality built into it to search through your docs, and it's just absolutely the best. And it is Python based, so it's easy to extend and modify. You can easily add your own themes, add your own extensions, and do whatever you want with it. So it's a Python tool that basically just uses Jinja 2 to template out a whole bunch of things and parse Markdown. It's really easy to extend. One of my favorite things about MkDocs is, and if you pair it up with a couple of really cool JavaScript tools called flowchart.js and JS sequence diagram, you can actually create flowcharts that are based out of Markdown and that are rendered at the time that they are built. This is extremely important because I can't even think of how many times I've looked at documentation and looked at the diagram in there and was like, well, where did this diagram come from? Oh, well, somebody made it on their computer and took a snapshot of it, and now they left the company 3 months ago, so that diagram is gone. So now the only way for me to be able to modify that diagram is for me to completely remake it, and I've actually done that before. There have been times when I've stayed up, past work for 3-4 hours trying to recreate a workflow diagram, and it was just miserable. So being able to have your diagrams in the source code is amazing. Now, these are somewhat limited in what they can do, but hey, everything's code and it can be extended, so best of luck to you. I really like them and they're really awesome. The other documentation tool that I'm going to briefly talk about is Sphinx. So Sphinx is a restructured text-based documentation tool with support for Markdown. It is the most common tool for creating Python SDK documentation for encode documentation. So if you've ever created doc strings inside of your Python methods, it's probably been using Sphinx to parse it. There are other tools that will do it, but Sphinx is pretty much the most common. And it's not even just for SDK documentation for encode docs. A lot of people who have really complex docs make their things in Sphinx. The TrueOS, which used to be PCBSD documentation, and I think almost all of the documentation that IX System does around like FreeNAS and things like that is all Sphinx documentation. They have their own theme, they have their own process for it, but it uses Sphinx just to create long-form documentation. So again, when I talked previously about how the more powerful your tool is, the more it can do, Sphinx can do literally anything. So you could do it for anything. It is so, powerful and stuff. It can format to literally any media, including LaTeX. I have trouble writing LaTeX on the best of days, and Sphinx does it. Sphinx might be sentient. We're currently uncertain. I'm pretty sure it's a Turing-complete documentation tool. But it's a great tool, but it does have a little bit of a learning curve to it. So one of the things that's really awesome about Sphinx that I love talking about, and it's not even really in Sphinx, technically it's in the standard library for Python, is doctest. Sphinx actually helps bring this out and makes it really, they have a Sphinx command for running it, but you can actually test the documentation inside of your Sphinx code and make sure that the outputs that you say it does actually work. So it will parse your code for things with the Python REPL syntax in front of it, actually run the code, and then the output that you have at the bottom, it will compare it and say, yes, the code that you permitted, that you gave, did actually produce that output. I have actually had my Sphinx documentation catch bugs that my unit tests have not, which is just probably bad because you should have good unit test coverage. But this is just another layer of things to make sure that what you said actually happens. So I love doctest, and I think that it doesn't get anywhere near the love that it deserves. Again, just to talk about the documentation tool ronn, this is what a markdown-based man page would look like, and that's what it converts to. So, demo time. This would have been a live demo at PyCon, but now it's going to be a live demo on a video. So, my issue was I needed to create many open source texts, all with a similar format that is production ready out of box, that kind of makes it easier for maybe not the most technical people to be able to contribute to. I don't want to have to worry about building the texts or doing any sort of build process or doing that. I just want to be able to push them to a GitHub repository and they work. And I want a workflow that jumpstarts docs writers. So my solution is an author would generate docs. Then they would write the docs. So they would generate a base template. Then they would write the docs. The author would publish the docs by pushing them to Git, and the docs would be published to a hosted solution. The tools that I chose to use for this project were Cookie Cutter for generating the docs, basically using a Python templating archetype generator to generate a docs directory, using a text editor just to write the docs, your favorite one, whichever one you want to use. Then you would just do a git commit and push to publish these docs to GitHub, and then they would publish them onto GitHub pages. They could be published anywhere. They could be published to read the docs. They could be published to your own static site or your own internal site. I just chose GitHub pages for the sake of this demo. The first step in our demo is we have to actually run the cookie cutter to get the templated documentation framework that has been created. So we run cookie cutter with the GitHub URL, and it will ask us if we want to re-download it if you've already used it. If you haven't, it won't ask you this, but it's usually always a pretty good idea to say yes, just to make sure that you get the latest version. And now you are able to give your site a name. So we're going to call this docs like code demo. Site description, all things cool. That'll be a good repository name. My name for the site author. My GitHub username is Zelgius. We're going to set it as a BSD3 license. We're going to select MkDocs as the engine. It's the only engine supported right now. We're going to host it on GitHub pages. And now that we have that, we can view our directory and see what we got. So we get a license file, we get a Docker file, which helps with the building process within Travis. You can also run the Docker file locally, but you don't have to. The framework defaults to just running things locally. We have a make file for all of our commands. The README, we have the actual docs directory, and then requirements.txt for the package that we need. So within our docs directory, you will see that there is a MkDocs.yaml and a docs directory. The MkDocs.yaml is the actual configuration for the server. It gives you things like site name, site description, and author, all those things we set up with the cookie cutter. The theme is default to material right now with a certain primary palette. And then the navigation and a whole bunch of extensions that can be installed are in here. And then inside of our docs directories, we have the CSS and JavaScript directories for custom CSS and JavaScript, as well as an index.markdown, which we can look at, which basically just has a really simple docs-like code demo title in it. So the first thing we have to do is we have to create a environment and install all of our requirements. So I'm just going to skip over that part in the video. And now, if I want to run my MkDocs site, all I simply have to do is do a make run, and it's going to serve my site over here on localhost port 8000. Sorry. And as you can see, we have our docs-like code page right here, and with the code, with the text that was inside of our docs. So if we open up docs, and then the index file, and I add MkDocs is really cool, and then if I want to add maybe a subtitle, and we're going to say, I don't know, welcome to PyCon 2020. And I run a make run again, it will serve my site again. And as you can see, it's updated. Now, this is something that you could run and then do live updates with. So you could say, I could run a biobu and then source my docs like code and activate my virtual environment and make run. And then I hit F2 over here, and then I open up docs, and index. And then we just write biobu is cool, and we just save it real quick, and it'll live update for us. So we can easily do that. And that is how you run this locally. Now, whenever you're ready and you are done and you want to go forward with this, you would go back to GitHub, and you would simply just create a new repository. And now our website will be updated over here. So now we have our code, and there's a build tag for it, and it's going to say build unknown. It usually takes a little bit of time for Travis to detect that this repository has a build. So we will just fast forward until it actually starts working. Oh, and it worked actually really quickly, so I don't even have to fast forward. So it has detected that there was a build, and now it's going to build our docs-like code. Now, I will say really quickly, I'm going to go ahead and cancel this first build. This first build is going to fail because we don't have a certain thing set up. And in our travis.yaml, there is a GitHub token that we need to set that will allow us to publish back up to GitHub. So what we're going to do is we're going to come over to GitHub really quickly, and we're going to just generate a quick token. Go to developer settings, personal access tokens. We're just going to generate a new one. And we're going to say, we're just going to call this docs-like code. And we're going to click all access on repo, and we're going to generate the token. And then we copy this token, and we come over here to Travis, and we go to settings, and we put GitHub token as the name, and we paste the value. And we've added it in, so now we have a GitHub token in here, and I can go back to Travis. And I can just restart this build, and now this build will succeed, and it will publish all of this directly to our GitHub pages on this site. So I'm going to go ahead and let it build, and then I'm going to fast forward real quick. And our build has succeeded, so we go back to our GitHub repository. And we have a link in the GitHub repository that takes you directly to your docs. And now they are being hosted, as you can see, on our GitHub pages. And just for one last demonstration to show that this is completely automated is I can go in really quick and update my docs and say automation is cool, and then I update that, and then I do a git add -a. And now that kicks off a second commit, and this will build the entire thing up again, publish it to GitHub, and then we'll be good, and the page will automatically be updated. And now this build is finished, so we go over here, and we update it, and it's automatically there. And that's the end of the demo. So you may be asking, can I try this for myself? And yes, you can. Unlocked EDU is an open source project dedicated to creating free and open source educational resources, such as textbooks, curriculums, worksheets, etc., for the use inside of schools. All of the books currently are written in Markdown with MkDocs. I actually found a really cool tool the other day that I'm evaluating for making textbooks. That's also Markdown, but just a different tool. We're going to see how that goes. A cookie cutter has been created to allow you to set up the entire documentation pipeline with one single command, as you saw in the demo. And you can actually visit the site here. This is the GitHub link, and you can see how to use it. I do like to quote my sources when I use them. A lot of the inspiration for this talk and inspiration for this work came from the Docs Like Code book by Ann Gentle. I hope I'm saying your name right. And I just absolutely love this book. It's a great book. You can pick it up on Amazon for Kindle or for paperback. And I highly recommend it if you want to go more in depth into the kind of things that I spoke about today. So, some final thoughts. Every job that I've implemented this workflow at, both the developer experience and the user experience have vastly improved. As you saw from the testimonial from my friend Jared, it is easier for them to onboard, but also their customers are happier and they get less support tickets because the docs are better. And because they have more information in the docs, they don't have to spend as much time in their support Slack channel as they normally would. Stop making docs as a punishment. Like, I kind of feel like that's what a docs sprint would be is, it's kind of a punishment on it. At the end, if you're just doing a doc sprint because you want to say, just clean up your docs and make them better and stuff, hey, go for it. That's great. I love it. But like kind of always just putting it off to the end, like code, doc sprint, it kind of is like, okay, you've had your, you've eaten all the good food. Now it's time to eat your vegetables. And that kind of just makes it feel not fun. Make docs fun, make it part of the process, and stop making them a punishment. If your docs suck, people will abandon your project. Plain and simple. There's no doubt about it. We live in a world of README engineering these days where we just basically, I will test something out, and if it doesn't work almost immediately, I quit. And then I move forward and I go on to the next thing. So if they are not good docs, people will go on to the next thing. And if you want people to use your project, the project with the best user experience will be the project that succeeds, not always the project with the better tech. We've seen that in the history of software engineering. Versioning docs is great. We should do a lot more of that. All docs should be versioned so you can access them. And so that way you can know, I can access older versions. I know what I actually expect of the API, and it would just work. And they're very important. Please version your docs. These slides will be available at my website, masonegger.com/talks/ci-docs. So feel free to go there if you want. But wait, there's more. So at the beginning of my presentation, you may have seen this cute little Python Sammy sticker. When we were planning on coming to PyCon this year, I had a lot of these stickers printed up and ready to go with PyCon 2020 at the bottom, so I couldn't possibly use them for any other conference, and now I have 2,000 of them sitting in my apartment. So if you want a PyCon 2020 Sammy sticker, please fill out this form at do.co/PyCon2020. It's a Google form, and if you give me your name and your mailing address, we will mail you a PyCon Sammy 2020 sticker. These are a limited edition sticker. You will probably not ever see this sticker again. I like collecting the Sammy stickers, so I'm happy that I'm able to get some. But definitely, if you want one, fill out your information and let us know. And I want to thank everybody for watching this talk. I hope you enjoyed it. This is a really fun talk of mine to give. I've given this talk a lot of times. I want to thank the PSF and everybody involved in PyCon for the amazing work that they've done in these unprecedented times. for making sure that those of us who have spent time creating these presentations can still get them to you, and those of us who want to watch these presentations still get to see them. Because even as like a sponsor who had been stuck at a booth and stuff, I see talks, I'm like, oh, I have to go see that talk. So now I get to view them all, and I really enjoy that. So thank you very much again for watching the talk, and stay safe out there.